I'm talking about the art of communication. And when we talk about communication, fundamentally, we have to understand our why. So, with every good communicator, when you know what your why is, it's so easy to translate what you're talking about. So, for example, for me as a poet, I often like to talk about deep emotions, but to be able to convey a really deep message without coming across too vague or coming across too strong, it's really nice to be able to talk about the world that we live in. For example, like your senses. I always tackle the five senses. What can I feel? What can I see? What can I touch? What does this emotion even make me remember in terms of food, for example? So let's say I want to talk about fluctuating emotions. I could talk about the seaside and the waves and the crashing of the waves. So you can see already, once I knew what my why was, the fact that I wanted to talk about different emotions and how they go up and down, it was easy for me to then find a place that I could place that in. So when you're thinking about the art of communication, fundamentally, first and foremost, know your why. And this makes things so much more easy. And then when you know your why, and you understand your audience, it makes it easier. So, for example, if I'm talking about deep emotions again, but I'm having an audience of 5 to 10 year olds, there's certain words I won't use. There's certain concepts that I won't be able to convey in that particular way, so there's so many things that we could talk about in when we talk about the art of communication, but ultimately the one statement that I love to stand on is that words create worlds. And what world do you want to bring your audience into? So with a song and with a poem, I'm creating two different worlds. Ultimately, I want to bring them into my storyline that I'm creating. And when you're creating a story, you want to take people on a journey. Everything's about a journey. And the life that we live now, it is about a journey. And you have to make it all clear. What journey do you want to take people on? What do you want to say? How do you want to be perceived in that moment? Is it something that's vulnerable? Is it something that's strong? Is it something that's aggressive? Is it something that's sweet? And for me, as a Christian creative, and I'm always wanting to endeavor to communicate the heart of God, I have to ask myself, what does God want to say in this piece? What does God want to say through me in this time? Because sometimes because of the fact that we are creative, sometimes we take too much reign and say, okay, you know what, I'm going to craft this whole thing of my own self. But because we have the presence of the Holy Spirit, we can have those conversations of God, what do you want to pinpoint in this? How do I then grow in my skill set to be able to hear you clearly, know what the why is of this conversation that we're having, and understand how to communicate that clearly? So ultimately, with the art of communication, know your why, know your audience, and don't feel like you have to take the weight of the world on your own because we're not doing it ourselves. I often say to people, we are creatives created by a creator to pursue and portray his creativity. So even my creativity, when I have writer's block and I feel like I can't communicate something, I can rely on the fact that I was created first and foremost by a creator. And his creativity is where I can get my bank from. So those are the things that I would often share with people, that if you want to grow in your art of communication, don't rely on yourself fully. Trust in the giftings that he has given you, but always be in conversation, write things down and test yourself. One of the things that I often did would be I would sit on the bus and I would give myself that bus journey to write 5 poetry pieces based on different random things that I would see in that journey. And I would then send it to a friend and say, hey, have a read of this. Let me know what you think, and see if they knew what I was talking about. Don't be scared to be vulnerable. Don't be scared to have conversations with people and bring them into that journey of you learning how to communicate. So be vulnerable, put yourself out there, go and speak to people who usually wouldn't even be your target audience and see if they can receive the message that you're writing. Because ultimately, fundamentally, even if it's not for that group of people, if another group of people could hear what you were saying, they could understand and feel what's being portrayed. So, with the art of communication, ultimately, make sure you know your why and trust that the Lord has you in all of that. That's where I would start.